The week that shook the world.
The images of destruction and flooding coming out of Japan are simply heartbreaking. On behalf of the American people,
I ask you to join me in praying for the victims of the recent devastation visited upon Japan.
在座的有日本记者，我想说几句话。
We will do anything and everything we can at this very difficult time. We will be watching closely.
Es sind noch Zehntausende Menschen vermisst, es sind Hunderttausende obdachlos.
To the Japanese people, we've had a terrible reminder of the destructive power of nature, and everyone should be thinking of that country and their people. And
the earthquake in Tohoku is unprecedented scale, as big as magnitude 9.0, and I feel deep sorrow. The people who suffer this terrible disaster.
Japan, a sprawl of mountainous islands in the Western Pacific. An industrial power and a beacon for development in Asia. This is a wealthy society, forward-looking, that stormed the world with its cars and high-tech gadgets. Yet the country is deeply traditional, with strong social hierarchies. Many keep the same job for life. Most live on the coastal fringes, a landmass that sits on 3 of the Earth's big tectonic plates. There are tremors every day. From childhood, they train in earthquake drills. Deep in the national psyche is what will happen when the big one strikes. 2:46 p.m. on March the 11th, 2011. In the middle of a Friday afternoon, Japan was going about its business just before the weekend. 80 miles out to sea and 20 miles deep, huge plates of the Earth's crust shifted slightly, relieving pressure built up over centuries. The quake was the most powerful ever to hit Japan. Even the Prime Minister was caught by surprise at its ferocity. It shook buildings as far away as Tokyo, more than 200 miles to the south. Parts of Japan moved several meters eastwards. The Earth actually shifted on its axis. The fierce rolling of the planet lasted longer than anyone could remember.
Walking into the office from the balcony from a phone call, and somebody said quake, then it really kicked in big time. And we didn't wait around too long before we all headed for the stairs and out of the building.
It was a very strong earthquake, and in the Tohoku region, mainly and over a wide area, damage has been inflicted. I offer my deepest sympathy to the people who have suffered the disaster.
But an earthquake itself was not a shock. Japan had been built to withstand that. The catastrophe came from the sea. so sudden that escape was impossible. Ten-metre-high walls of water swallowed up everything in their path. Nothing could stop it. Whatever the design, however strongly built, we can see the buildings and the cars, but not the people inside. From crystal blue seawater, it became the most destructive energy of nature imaginable. Houses designed for earthquakes crushed like matchwood. Boats made for the worst storms, tossed aside as if feathers. A force so great that it took whole communities, while some watched in total shock. Others in their thousands were crushed and swept to their deaths. Tsunami comes from two Japanese words. Su, meaning harbour, and Nami, meaning wave. Scientists at Britain's National Oceanography Centre can simulate how the devastation was caused, starting with the movement of the Earth's tectonic plates.
In this case, we have a destructive plate, so the Pacific plate is sliding under the Eurasian plate and the North American plate. And because there's friction, what's happening is, as the plate goes down, it's dragging the continental plate with it. And then every so often, the whole thing suddenly releases and we get a sudden upshoot of land. And so the paddle here is simulating the seabed, and as the seabed lifts up, so it pushes water and creates a wave.
The wave travels at speeds of up to 500 miles an hour across the ocean, only about a metre high though. Then it slows as it reaches shore, and that makes it worse.
As the wave approaches the coast, it slows down. It goes 500, 400, 300, 200 to 50 miles an hour, roughly. And so the back of the wave is still going at 500 miles an hour. The front of the wave is slowed down. And so your 1 metre wave suddenly piles up, and we go from 1 metre to 10 metres, moving towards the coast at about 50 miles an hour.
This is a tank specially designed to monitor wave movements and examine the impact of earthquakes and tsunamis. And there are dozens and dozens of research centres like this all around the world, all of them openly exchanging information. But the cold truth is that still no one can predict when an earthquake will strike and what the impact of the tsunami will be. So, as if out of nowhere, the wave struck. Slowly, chillingly, we saw that many of Japan's well-ordered coastal neighborhoods were no more.
The waves just kept coming and coming. I raced from my boat up the hill as a wall of water crashed into the bay.
They came back and were shocked by the damage.
I was at the car with my daughter when everything began to shake violently. We rushed back to the house, grabbed a few bags, drove up out of town just before the tsunami struck.
In some places, the water had struck brutally and just as quickly withdrawn, all in seconds. In others it lingered, turning the fruit orchards and rice paddies of northeastern Japan into fetid swamps. Survivors looked out on neighbours' houses that had simply vanished, and the nation faced the unimaginable. Loved ones were missing. Grief and anger had to be put on hold for many. Aftershock shuddered through the ground. Warnings of more tsunamis echoed. Japan tried to rescue and recover, and stories of tragedy and heroism unfolded. The port city of Rikuzen Takata. A mother and father picked their way through the rubble of a building where their son Hiroyuko worked. At first, they couldn't believe that he might not have survived. They call out his name. Then slowly, like so many other families, they're making themselves accepted.
It's been 4 or 5 days now. It's only a short distance from home. He's not coming back, is he? We are starting to lose hope.
The city of Ishinomaki. Some of these rescue teams travel the world: New Zealand, China, Pakistan, and other disasters. 4 days after, they bring out a 25-year-old office worker, alive. This couple picking through the debris. Their karaoke bar once stood here, but they're not just looking for what they can save.
I'm searching. My father, my mother. I want to find them. I want to find them.
Yes, there is movement in the car below. Rescuers pull the person out, an elderly man. Don't be afraid, he's told. You're safe now. All around, fires burnt through leaking gas. Phone lines were down, roads blocked, infrastructure destroyed, oil refineries ablaze. But it didn't stop there. The stakes were to become much, much higher. It was as if the apocalypse of Mother Nature had allied itself with the man-made apocalypse that has been feared for so long. Just over 40 years ago, as Japan's quest for economic growth spurred its need for energy, a nuclear complex was built on the coast at Fukushima. It was made up of 6 reactors. Japan has more than 50 reactors in all, supplying 30% of its electricity. There are more than 440 reactors around the world, with many more planned. A day after the quake, a reactor building exploded. Then another, and another. But scientists knew of the earthquake and tsunami risks, so what went wrong?
I think the risk of tsunami was just not figured into the equation. It's a situation where not all contingencies were taken into account. Because, again, the earthquake was handled, that was fine. It was a tsunami that smashed into, that swamped all of the 6 stations afterwards that is causing all this problem.
The tsunami knocked out the backup generators needed to pump water that cooled the reactors. They had automatically shut down with the earthquake, but inside they stayed hot.
Inside of that primary containment vessel is the nuclear reactor itself, which is made up of zinc rods called fuel rods, and inside of those rods is contained, each rod is contained many hundreds of pellets of uranium, which is undergoing nuclear reactions and produces heat. And the fuel rods are surrounded by water, which is constantly being pumped in. Water under very high pressure, it's turned into steam, and then that steam is vented off, and it turns the blades of electrical dynamos to produce electrical current.
So it's just like a kettle?
Just like a kettle.
The key task all along was to pump in water to cool the reactors. The aim is to keep water flowing through to reduce temperatures, but there's a dilemma here because this creates steam which could trigger a leak or explosion. And even so, once exposed, they emit radiation. Also, a tank outside the sealed reactor contained used nuclear fuel rods. Like old batteries, they're still dangerous, and they too have to be cooled by water, or again, leak radiation. Each day, the Japanese government tried to reassure. As soon as the earthquake struck, the Prime Minister addressed nuclear fears.
Regarding our nuclear power facilities, some of the nuclear power plants have stopped automatically, but so far, no radioactive material or radiation has been confirmed to have been leaked to the outside.
Naoto Kan even visited the plant and was filmed holding crisis meetings in what became a standard blue boiler suit. There are many issues to tackle, he says. The government will do all it can to cope with the situation. There seemed, though, to be no stopping it. Nuclear fuel rods, with no water to cool them, were in danger of melting down and releasing radiation into the atmosphere.
Well, there are two principal radioactive contaminants, and one of them is iodine-131, which goes for the thyroid, could cause cancers of the thyroid. That's relatively short-lived, and it will be gone in just a few days. But the real danger is cesium-137, which goes for muscle and bone. And depending upon the concentrations of it, it could take a century before it is lowered to 1% of its initial concentration.
More and more unprecedented and desperate measures were used. Japan's nuclear future was put in the hands of a few brave men as radiation levels, measured in millisieverts, rose around the plant. 250 millisieverts an hour for a while, and that's equal to a whole lifetime's safe exposure. Death by radiation is very nasty, a complete breakdown of the immune system. They became the faceless heroes of Japan. Helicopters scooped water from the sea, 2,000 gallons a time, and flew back to drop it on billowing smoke. But each reactor needs 12,000 gallons a day to keep cool. It didn't end the problem. The area around the plant was evacuated. First 10 kilometers, then 20. But in one hospital, the staff refused to leave, saying their patients were the priority.
We're not really supposed to stay here, but this is our job. I really resent the nuclear plant.
Then higher radiation levels were measured in Tokyo. The US and other governments made arrangements for their nationals to leave. China, Germany and other big nuclear-powered countries are re-examining their projects. Japan was accused of glossing over and being secretive with information, and a senior community official spoke about being abandoned.
The people of Fukushima Prefecture have reached the limits of their tolerance of fear and anxiety, and I hope that the people of Japan understand this.
Japan has been through disaster many times before. They still remember the dead from the nuclear bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Prime Minister has described this catastrophe as the worst crisis since the Second World War.
Could I hear attention, please? There has been a state of emergency declared.
The world too has faced nuclear challenges. In 1979 in Pennsylvania, there was a partial core meltdown in a reactor at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, and some radioactive gases escaped into the atmosphere. Then in 1986, an explosion at a plant in Chernobyl in the then Soviet Union sent a plume of radioactive fallout into the atmosphere that spread for hundreds of miles. It is that spectre, now from Japan, that began to haunt the world.
We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the United States, whether it's the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. Let me repeat that. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific.
And it suffered dreadful earthquakes. Kanto, near Tokyo in 1923, that killed more than 140,000. 1948, Fukui, near Kyoto, nearly 4,000 dead. Kobe, in 1995, more than 6,000 lost their lives. Japan is in the northwest corner of what's known as the Pacific Ring of Fire, where pressure from the Earth's plates create 90% of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Japan is at its most vulnerable spot. And in 2004, the Asian tsunami killed almost 250,000 people, destroying Aceh in Indonesia and many other places, just as the sea swamped northeast Japan. The world will become a little safer this week from lessons learned, but will anything substantively change about how and where we live?
People have to live somewhere, and they need to also produce food, they need to produce fish, they need to produce and agriculture. They need factories, and this has all got to go somewhere. And it's impossible to move every human being on this planet away from natural disaster or danger. Hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, these are all part of the hazard of living on planet Earth.
Nuclear power is also an important part of our own energy future, along with renewable sources like wind, solar, natural gas, and clean coal.
So we will continue to use nuclear power. The tectonic plates of the Earth's crust will continue to move. We'll keep building our homes on earthquake faults and cluster around the coast. More aware, though, that our lives, with all our tears and hopes, are just a small and vulnerable part of planet Earth, the slightest shift, and colossal human impact.
机の下に身を隠してください。現在ご覧いただいているのは最初の